Tozzi ragionier Ugo. Matricola...
Oh man. Alright. Okay, who am I doing today? Carol Ann Duffy. Okay. Carol Ann Duffy is why the fuck am I even doing this? You know who Carol Ann Duffy is. You've read about her. You've seen the Facebook statuses about her. You've seen her on X Factor singing Les Miserables to Simon or what's his name, whatever his name is. No, hang on a second. That's Susan Boyle. Okay, what was I doing this morning again? So I went out and figured out who Carol Ann Duffy is, which wasn't easy because her name tends to be written in small print on the cover of her books, so that you might not figure out who this is written by if you're looking at it from the Sugarloaf Mountain in Brazil. This is her fourth collection from before she became Poet Laureate. It's mostly about the topic of personal memory and the past. Even though there are some individual poems which aren't really related to that, sort of thrown in there. Even though she is the Poet Laureate, I will now be reviewing this book objectively. I suppose that Duffy fits the stereotype of English poetry in a good way, in the sense that she's got this really nice, really measured sense of phrase. When this works in combination with her best imagery, it's undeniably memorable. It's never sensationalist, never trying to flash you or impress you or wow you. In her best poems, it actually feels like she is closer to you, almost like she knows you personally. And that's a skill that very few poets can pull off. At her best, Duffy is both modest and sophisticated, in a way that is kind of contradictory, but kind of isn't. For someone who is at her fourth collection, I can't believe some of the cliches that pop out in this book. Tonight, a love letter out of a dream stammers itself in my heart. Love, dream, and heart all used together in one sentence. A bit risky, maybe? She awakes with someone's face strewn in her head, like petals which once made a flower. Oh man, come on now. The only thing I could think about which would be more cliched would be one of those teenage poems about getting drunk. Suddenly the rain is hilarious. The moon wobbles in the dusk. What a laugh. Unseen frogs belch in the damp grass. The strange perfumes of darkening trees. Cheap red wine and the whole world a mouth. Give me a double. A kiss. You've entitled the poem Drunk, and it's just about getting drunk. I don't actually want to make fun of this because it's actually a really profound poem, if you're 16 years old. But it does reveal a problem that Duffy sometimes describes personal experience as though that were poetic in and of itself, just because it's personal experience. Now I smell you peeling an orange in the other room. Good for you.
Who gives a fuck?
Up to about halfway, I was really enjoying the collection because, aside from these occasional blunders, the technique is really good. But then it started boring me. So many of the things that she does or talks about seem to have already been done or already been talked about even before 1993 when the collection was published. So many others I don't get because perhaps I'm too young to understand poems about growing old, or because of peculiarly national references that I don't get because I didn't grow up in this country. All of which suggests that the problem here is not the poetry. The problem is me. I don't think this poetry is bad in any serious way, I just think that I am the wrong target audience. And this may come down not to the old problem of subjectivity, I wouldn't let that find a space in our review, but to a real generational conflict. I think people, especially here in England, often underestimate how much the intellectual scene has changed in Europe over the last 20 years or so. There is a whole, mostly unrecognized generation of young intellectuals who are bound, among other things, by a whole idea of borders and cultures and nationalities and language that is radically new. People who may be born in France or in Spain, but who are not just French and Spanish. What may be called, perhaps, the first real generation of the European Union. And for these young men and women, a new poetry of identity is required. Now, I think that some of the new poetry out there already speaks to this generation. I think of Jen Hadfield or Claire Trevienne, for instance, whose work I felt to be much closer to my interests and my preoccupations. With Carol Ann Duffy, you read a poem like Oslo, which is cliched already in its title, where she says, not to speak the language makes you innocent again, invisible. Like the experience of being around people who don't speak your language were something weird or exceptional or new. And also like not speaking a language were a condition, when in reality it is a choice. This criticism is fair only to an extent, of course, because this collection is 20 years old and this generation belongs to the last 20 years. Meantime is all about growing old and about things that grow old, so perhaps this is like a really clever game and I didn't get it. But to me personally, this poetry felt it felt old. Really old.